You've probably heard photographers say, keep your ISO as low as possible. And yes, that is true in a perfect world. Out here, most of the wildlife action is centered around dawn and dusk. Light is never perfect. And so ISO is often the unsung hero of the exposure triangle. It's a tool that saves your images when the light disappears, and is the difference between freezing an animal mid-action or walking away with nothing but a blur. Today we're going to deep dive into ISO. I'm going to explain exactly how it works inside your camera, what digital noise is, how far we can push modern sensors, and in the field why sometimes raising your ISO is the most creative choice we can make. I'm also going to cover some common mistakes, low light shooting, and practical ways to balance ISO using shutter speed and aperture. Let's dive in. ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization and controls your camera's sensitivity to light. Originally in the film days it referred to the film stock sensitivity, so ISO 100 film was fine-grained and best in bright light, whereas ISO 800 film was grainier but useful in low light. However, in digital cameras, ISO works a bit different. Your sensor has a base sensitivity, usually around ISO 100 or 200. As you increase your ISO, you amplify the signal that sensor captures. Here's the technical bit. The sensor records tiny electrical charges from incoming photons. Raising the ISO increases the gain on that signal, making the image brighter. The trade-off, however, is that along with that signal, you also amplify noise, which is random variations in the camera's sensor. So essentially, ISO is a balancing act. Brightness versus noise. Practically, here's what ISO does. Low ISOs, from 100 to 400, give you clean, smooth files, but do require a lot of light or slow shutter speeds, and so therefore great when shooting in the middle of the day or when on a tripod. Medium ISOs, from 800 through to 1600, is sort of the sweet spot for wildlife photography. It's bright enough to handle those early mornings and evenings, but still gives you a relatively clean file on modern cameras. And then high ISO, from 3200 and above. This is where noise becomes obvious, but it's also where magic can happen. Freezing action in that last light of day or capturing nocturnal animals under the stars. These type of images would not exist if it wasn't for high ISO. So let's put this into practice out in the bush. We've got a herd of elephants moving through here. It's sunset, so the light is fading pretty quickly and we've got some long, deep shadows. Now with the elephants moving through these deep shadows, if we start at ISO 100, even at aperture f4, my shutter speed still drops to 100th of a second. Now if I hold dead still and the animal doesn't move, I might be able to get a sharp shot. But if the animal moves, it doesn't work. Now if I bump up my ISO to 1600, immediately my shutter speed jumps to 500th of a second and I'll be able to capture the moment. Now let's push it even further. With the light fading pretty quickly, I'm going to bump up my ISO to 6400. If you look closely, you can see there is quite a bit of grain, but I've still managed to capture the essence of the moment, and that's this elephant herd at twilight. And that's the power of ISO. It buys you the freedom to work with the light you have, not just the light you wish you had. So for common mistakes, here are some traps that I see most often when regarding ISO. Firstly, being afraid of noise. Way too many photographers sacrifice the moment because they're obsessed with the idea of a clean file. Remember, noise can be managed, motion blur can't. Secondly is shooting with your ISO on auto without setting limits. Your camera will happily crank the ISO up to 25,600, when perhaps in the moment we could have opened the aperture or slightly slowed the shutter speed. So set sensible max ISO limits in your camera's menu. And lastly is not testing your camera. All sensors are different, and so some bodies handle ISO 6400 beautifully, whereas others fall apart after 3200. Know your gear's limits. For practical tips, here are some ways to make ISO work for you. Expose correctly. Underexposed high ISO files often look worse than properly exposed ones, so don't try fix it later, but rather get it right in camera. Use aperture and shutter creatively. Sometimes you don't need to stop down. Open your lens instead of pushing ISO further, or use subject movement to your advantage by dragging the shutter. Noise reduction in post. Modern software is phenomenal. Tools like Lightroom or Topaz can clean up files so well that 6400 looks like ISO 800 from a decade ago. So that's it for ISO, and more importantly the whole exposure triangle. Those three settings of shutter speed, aperture and ISO are the foundations of every image you'll ever take. If you master them, you're suddenly not just taking photos, you're making creative choices. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at another powerful tool for wildlife photography, autofocusing systems. What they are, how to set them up, and how to trust them when the action gets fast. See you then.